Okay, and here we are on Mensch Life. Thanks so much for being with us. We're delighted to be back here. I'm David Grossman.
And I'm Doris Epstein.
And we are happy to be back for another round of Mensch Life. We have an exciting show for you today. I'll tell you who we have in the studio. Right here with us now we have Mark Persaud from the Canadian International Peace Project. And we also have Dave Sheskin, who's a retired major from the Israeli military intelligence. So we've got a really exciting show for you. Going to talk about a number of current events issues. Last week there was a big kerfuffle. The United States made yet another attempt to bring Israel and the Palestinians together, and then there was we found out that there was 1,600 new apartments that were being planned, and seems to have thrown everything into a tailspin. So we're going to talk about that. Also, earlier in the month, there's a Muslim scholar named Dr. Tahir Al-Quadri. He issued a 600-page judgment. This is sort of like the Islamist version, I think, of the Goldstone Report, where he says he's completely denounced terrorism. So we're going to talk about that and see if this is hopeful, if this is positive.
He's announced a fatwa against terrorism.
That's right. It's a fatwa against terrorism. So that's
it's a strong religious
That's
conviction.
right. So we'll talk about that and see what kind of weight that carries in the Muslim world. So we'll discuss that, and also later on in the show, we have Monica Parker. She's lived and worked in LA for 25 years. She's an award-winning actress and producer, and she's recently has produced a show called Sex Pies and a Few White Lies. She'll be with us a little bit later on in the show. We're looking forward to speaking with her too. So hang in there. We're going to be right back for some interesting discussion. Okay, we're back here on Mensch Life. Firstly, I'm going to introduce Mark Persaud. He is a former federal prosecutor for the Department of Justice, also legal counsel for the RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and he's currently the president of the CIP, the Canadian International Peace Project. Mark, welcome to the show. Please tell us about the CIPP. What's it all about, and what are some of the initiatives?
The Canadian International Peace Project was established post 9/11 to respond to some of the difficulties that was created in communities post 9/11. Essentially, the mandate of the organization is to build relationships between diverse communities, including communities in conflict. One of her major focus in the organization is building relationships between the Jewish and other communities, including the Muslim and Arab communities.
Right. And there's a project which is the mentorship program.
Yes, one of our projects that we're extremely proud of is the Jewish Somali Mentorship Project, in which senior Jewish professionals are mentoring Somali university students and young professionals. And what makes this project very unique, David, is that it's the first time in the history of Canada that we know of, or anywhere else in the world for that matter, that a large Muslim community at a national level is embracing the Jewish community and vice versa to work in a very constructive and positive way. And as a spin-off of that, lots of exciting things are happening as a result of this new relationship. For example, the Somali community recently wanted to reach out back to the Jewish community as a expression of appreciation for the assistance that their young people are getting. And they spent a day at senior residence in the Jewish community, in which they brought their food, culture, music, and spent a day with the Jewish seniors. Interestingly, also very quickly, the Canadian Somali Congress, which is the national advocacy organization of the Canadian Somali community, actually invited two prominent Canadians of Jewish background to be part of their organization. And that also marks a first that we know of in which a Muslim organization at a national level has actually invited Jews to be part of their organization.
That's very nice. How is the organization funded?
The Canadian International Peace Project is largely funded by private donations, though the Jewish Somali Project in itself is funded by the federal government.
Okay, well, some good initiatives, and building bridges is a great idea. So we appreciate the work you're doing.
Is it just the Somali community that you are making contact with?
No,
Is
no.
there any other Muslim ethnic community? How about the Palestinians? How about the Syrians? How about all the others?
Indeed, we are working with all of these communities. In fact, the co-chairs of the board of the Canadian International Peace Project, one is a young lady of Jewish heritage, and the other is a young lady of Palestinian heritage. One lives in Winnipeg, and one lives in Ottawa. We are working with other communities. In fact, we have a number of initiatives at the Canadian International Peace Project with the Muslim community and the Arab community, in which we are focusing on the next generation of leaders, getting them to work together in accordance with Canadian values, and building bridges with other communities. So yes, we are focused on other communities.
Okay, let's jump into our first topic here. We're just going to bring up this slide for you. This is a quote from from Arutz Sheva, I think yesterday's newspaper, very recent. Okay, so Netanyahu says, let's not get carried away with the U.S. crisis. And of course, he's referring to these additional building plans in what a United Press International analyst headlined Biden's Operation Boondog. All the vice president's arrival in Israel last week coincided with a government announcement for construction of previously approved housing for Jews in the Jewish Ramat Shlomo neighborhood, bordered on all sides by densely populated Jewish neighborhoods of Sanhedria, Ramot, Eshkol, French Hill, and Ramot. United States considers the area, along with Gilo, Ramot, and others outlying Jerusalem neighborhoods, to be part of a future Palestinian Authority state. And U.S. President Barack Obama has called them settlements. Ramot alone has over 40,000 residents. And I'm going to turn to Dave Sheskin to start this off. And by the way, to give Dave a proper introduction, he's a retired major, as I said before, with Israeli intelligence, and he's written this fantastic book. He was on the show recently. The book is called Waltzing with the Wicked. Delight to have you back, Dave. What are your thoughts on this whole issue of these additional building announcements in East Jerusalem?
Well, two things. One, that Israeli diplomat or member of parliament, Knesset, when he spewed those words, I think that was an error. Timing was off. But
Which words are you referring to?
When he spoke about the settlements,
Okay,
he came out
right.
and he said, we're going to build more settlements. And as far as Joe Biden is concerned, I think he put his mouth into motion before having his brain in gear.
How
could
so?
have held back. I just think he came out as very, very angry,
Yes.
hostile,
Right.
and it wasn't right. And there's something here that I want to say.
Sure.
These settlements, I think, are justified. In the meantime, until we have peace, these settlements are justified. I've never heard of a country that went to war and captured some land from another country that had the whole world come down on them the way they're coming down on the Jewish state. I've never heard of that before. And if our neighbors in the West Bank or wherever in the occupied territories, what they call it, if our neighbors said, you know what, let's have peace talks, peace for peace, then let's talk about land, we could have something going.
Right.
But for them to say, you give us land, we'll talk peace, doesn't work. So we're going to stay there until they're ready to sit and talk about peace and not land in exchange for peace.
Okay, Mark, what's your take on this?
Well, I think it's an unfortunate incident in that the timing couldn't have been worse. We have to remember that, though, it's important to remember that the 10-month moratorium on building in the West Bank does not include East Jerusalem. So one should not equate the two, that one is in violation of the promise made. However, I think what is very important, and I understand that there are a lot of nuances, there are issues, there are security reasons, there are other compelling factors that are at play. I wouldn't profess to have a an enlightened view of it that is the correct one. However, my concern, David, is that at a time when Israel is facing a lot of difficulties, and some people put it existential threats. It's a time when Israel cannot afford to alienate its allies, and it's one thing to argue about or justify the position that you hold, and the sincerity or the propriety of your position, but it's another thing to be practical.
Okay.
And Israel, the United States has been a long-standing ally of Israel, and this is not a time to alienate friends. The timing couldn't have been worse, but I'm pleased that Prime Minister Netanyahu issued a prompt apology and characterized it as hurtful.
Okay, we're going to take a very short break, and we're going to come back and talk about the relationship between Israel and the U.S. and how this is affected and so on. So hang in there. We'll be right over to Doris.
I want to put this to both of you. With all this talk about Jerusalem, east and west, legally, Jerusalem is Jewish by international law. And I really don't understand where this distinction is coming from. Is it a justifiable distinction, East and West Jerusalem? Dave?
As far as I'm concerned, there is no East and West. There is one Jerusalem. And I can tell you the reason for that, Doris. In 1967, in the War of 67, the Hashemite army, the Jordanian army, actually destroyed so many Jewish, ancient Jewish cemeteries. It took the headstones, they made latrines out of them. They urinated on them. It was just awful. And then, if you do that to a country, and then like they did that to us, and then we took East Jerusalem, we're not going to let him back in for that reason. Like, there's a lot of political reasons, but because the Arabs, what they did in East Jerusalem during the war, there is no more East Jerusalem. There's one Jerusalem. Arabs can live there, Jews can live there. If we learn how to live in peace, let it be one city for both people. But there's one Jerusalem.
How do you feel about that, Mark?
Well, I do not profess to understand to have a firm grasp of the legal status of Jerusalem in international law. However, I agree with David in that it's a city, and I've been there a number of times. It would be extremely difficult to see it as a divided city. It will change the entire character, the composition, etc. of the city. In many ways, it would be very distressing to not see it as one city, and practically, it will be very difficult.
Okay, let's move on now. We're going to talk about this fatwa. We have a slide. We're going to bring it up on the screen. This is the fatwa that Dr. Tahir al-Qadri issued. 600 pages. I don't know if any of you guys read it. It's on my night table to read. I'm kidding, by the way. It's not really on my night table. Okay, an influential Muslim scholar has issued a global ruling against terrorism and suicide bombing. Dr. Tahir al-Qadri from Pakistan says the 600-page judgment, known as the fatwa, completely dismantles Al-Qaeda's violent ideology. Describes Al-Qaeda as an old evil with a new name, has not been sufficiently challenged. In his religious ruling, Dr. Qadri says Islam forbids the massacre of innocent citizens and suicide bombings. That this apparently he goes much further by omitting all ifs, ands, or buts. Let's start with you on this one, Mark. Is he really stepping out here, and what do you see happening with
I was
modern
excited
Islam?
to see this.
Well, I'm surprised that this hasn't come out earlier or more regularly. Surely we've had Islamic scholars making pronouncements about the status of suicide bombings and killing of innocents in Islam. And there's a surah in the Quran that actually forbids it quite explicitly. I'm pleased to see it, and from what I know of Islam, it seems to be theologically sound, and I hope it acts as a catalyst and an impetus for other Muslim scholars, including in North America, to come out and confirm what the scholar said in terms of the status of suicide bombings.
Is this happening? Is the current changing? Are Muslims starting to speak out? Or is this an
Moderates,
isolated incident?
Well, that's a criticism that I hear quite often. That where is the voice or the voices of the Muslim community on these issues? And regrettably, the Muslim community is not as organized as it could be, and which is why at times there seems to be difficulty getting them to respond in a cohesive way. But I hope that this is a beginning of voices from the community, credible voices that will speak out as strongly as the scholar did.
Dave, is this a beginning? Can we hope?
There's always hope, and I think what this scholar Tahir al-Qadri said or has written, I think it's phenomenal. I think the moderate Muslims are going to become a little more
Vocal?
I think so. However, I put it this way: one drop of water in the ocean is not going to make a flood. So it's not enough. It's not going to take the radical Islamists and convert them or their ideologies. And if you had the power of a mullah, that would be different. But remember, he's a scholar. He doesn't have the power to change things. He can't with the moderates. He can't with the radicals.
You know, we hear about people, moderate Muslims, speaking out, and that their lives are apparently at risk. Mark, can you comment when moderate Muslims speak out against radical Islams? Are they taking a big risk? I mean, we hear about it. We hear everyone's got a fatwa on their head, okay? But I mean, what's your take on that?
Well, certainly in some jurisdictions, they are, of course, at risk, very much so. And fortunately, I think largely in North America and some European countries, it's relatively safe for Muslims to speak out if they disagree with some of the radicals.
Unless you're a wife, right? Because
Well,
that's honor killings is something we've seen.
Yes.
Is definitely evident in North American society, in certain homes, right?
Well, that's a difficult one because look, this is a community that is still grappling with how do they balance living in the West and balance their values, their
Mark,
religion.
I grew up here from Hamilton. There was no grappling with how to live here. When we met a Muslim, they were like anybody else. Suddenly, they're grappling. The last 10, 12 years, there's grappling, and there's griping, and there's disengagement, and there's isolation. It was never like that before. What's different now?
Fear.
Fear?
If I may interrupt. Yeah, fear. The Muslims that live here, the moderate Muslims, they're afraid of the radicals. And what gets to me the Muslim population in the world today is between 1.5 and 1.8 billion, and only 2% are considered radical Islamists, but 2% of 1.8 billion is 36 million. So this 2% is instilling fear into the other 98% moderate Muslims, and they don't want to react because they think if they will react,
Okay,
their
we're
lives are at stake.
gonna take a short break, and then we're gonna talk about the impact of radical Islam here in Western society, from a terrorism standpoint and from a free speech standpoint. So hang in, we're gonna
Dave,
be right back.
You have reason to fear. I understand there are 2 fatwas against you.
Yes, there, unfortunately, but
Why?
I-
Why are they doing this? Why are they targeting you?
some of them have read my book. One fatwa came to me via email from an imam in Detroit. I did notify the local authorities. Didn't do very much. And the second one I received from Europe, from England. And I just let it go. Am I afraid? No. I'm afraid for my children and my wife. Now, my children and grandchildren all live in Israel. My wife and I are here, and I'm afraid for them. But for me, no.
Well,
Absolutely not.
Well, Daniel Pipes was here a couple weeks ago talking with Wafa Sultan at one of the synagogues, and he seems like a fairly moderate guy because he was saying that he believes that there's hope for moderate Islam. And
In time, he says.
In
In
time.
time.
But he had to cancel his talk at York University. And he's got to be. I didn't ask him if he's got a fatwa against him, but I mean, you would think he probably does. I could ask him, but
I would have liked to have seen Daniel Pipes walk out the front door. When they started yelling at him and they started interrupting him, he was escorted out the back door of the auditorium. I'd never allow that to happen. I'll walk in the front door, I'll walk out the back door. And I like Daniel Pipes. I was with him on another show. If he thinks eventually the radical Islamists will make peaceful
David, just what? You'll walk in the front door, you'll walk out the front door.
Exactly. I will not
Not
have
the
myself
back door.
escorted by the police out the back door.
well, Dave, you're an exception, and I think it's great what you do. But there are a lot of people who are afraid. There was a Michael Orn video, which we've been trying to queue up here for weeks, where his speech was interrupted repeatedly in University of California. I don't know if we're going to have time for that today. Danny Ayalon, same thing. People were yelling from the crowd. There was another Israeli speaker whose talk had to be canceled due to threats, and that's what Daniel Pipes is talking about. He's saying it's not just terrorism. So he's more concerned about the loss of free speech. Mark, what do you think about that? Are you concerned about the loss of free speech and free expression in North America?
I'm greatly concerned, and the Prophet Muhammad's cartoons was a good illustration of that. And this is where I think in the West we'll have an increasingly difficult time trying to balance it and deal with it. Remember, the freedom of speech includes the freedom to offend. In some cultural and religious groupings, this is not allowed. In Western society and our values here in the West, we're allowed to offend, and that's part of freedom of speech. I think there has to be, it's a real challenge. There has to be a real effort put into educating, especially newcomers to Canada, in terms of and the ones who have been here for a while, in terms of what is permissible and what's not, why we protect and cherish these values, and that these are values that people will necessarily have to subscribe to.
Mark, I have to cut right through this because it's vivid in my mind what Dr. Wafa Sultan, a Muslim herself, says. There are no moderate Muslims. Islam is Islam, and that's it. Only in the West do we use that term because it makes people feel better.
I disagree. I disagree strongly with Dr. Sultan's comments. I have Muslims in my family. My sister is married to one of those moderate Muslims who enjoys cigars and cognac, but goes to prayers during the holy months and is a very modern Muslim and proud to call himself a Muslim. Look, I grew up in a culture with Muslims. Both of my neighbors were Muslims in the country I grew up in. There are, as David said, over 1 billion Muslims. The Middle East doesn't represent all the Muslims in the world. It's less than a third. I'm afraid many people in our society haven't had contact with those Muslims. Take, for example, the Somalis today in Canada, who are open to work with the Jewish community. They do not come from a history of anti-Semitism. They come from a history of modern Sufi-like Islam. So I think Dr. Sultan is is got it entirely wrong and is misrepresenting the Muslim world. They are radicals and they're regular, everyday Muslims.
Dave?
Dave,
Okay, here's the difference. The moderate Muslims come here with the intention of having a better life. They integrate well. Their kids go to our schools. There's a mix. They do not cover their faces when they go out in public. They wear jeans when they walk in public. There's no honor killings. This is the moderate Muslim that comes to Canada really searching for a better life. The radical Muslims that come here want to destroy freedom and democracy. They want that to become extinct. And and I've said this on every program I've been on, if we don't do something about it now by changing the immigration laws to this country,
Yeah.
the next generation and the generation after will find freedom and democracy extinct. It will not be there.
There's-
And that's
there's-
my biggest
immigration
fear.
laws. I've
There's immigration issues, but there's also
Yes.
radicalization,
There's also
radicalization that
political
takes place
correctness.
here
There's
as
also
well.
political correctness.
Political correctness.
They're
there's
going to
a
call
time-
you a racist for what you're saying.
Let them call me a racist. There's political correctness, and then there's common sense. And we have to use more common sense when it comes to allowing people into this country.
Mark, do you think it's an immigration issue or do you think it's something else? Because I know that there is radicalization which takes place here. There are people that go to school and for whatever reason they just get mixed up with the wrong people. What do you think, Mark?
Remember the 18 young Muslims who were charged with planning terrorist activities in Canada. They were products of the public school system, not the Muslim religious schools. I think, look, of course, there will be some people who will come through the immigration system who are undesirable in terms of having in Canada. But I think the major focus, the problem is not the immigration system. It's making sure that people who are here are attuned to Canadian values and they are properly educated and directed in terms of what is acceptable in this society and what's not.
Dave, you disagree.
Disagree 100%. If you're saying immigration is not the issue, it is. If how much time we have left, let me do this in 30 seconds. If somebody wants to come to this country, I think there should be a long waiting period of 5 to 7 years to make sure these people are really decent people. If they come here, they should come with sufficient funds to take care of their families and not drain our welfare system. I think they should not go to the little enclaves that they have set up like they have in Mississauga and in Brampton. They should not be allowed to have their own schools just for them where they teach homicide bombings and things like this. I mean, this comes down to immigration. Canada is we are a compassionate people, but here, compassionate and as you said, Doris, what's the term you used before? Political correctness?
Political correctness.
And I'm saying common sense. You know, we have to know who's coming here and not saying, oh, you know, Canada, we let everybody in. We'll give you a home. A democratic country will give you freedom. We can't just do that anymore. Now we have to know who's coming. If we want our future generations to live in peace, let's know who's entering our country.
Okay, we've got just a couple minutes left. Mark, what are your thoughts, closing messages for how do we achieve peace?
Well, part of it is to ensure that that there's proper security. Security, peace, and development go hand in hand. We have to ensure that, I agree with David, that people who are coming here have to be properly screened. I disagree with him in terms of his apparent broad characterization of people. Most people come here are decent people who immigrate. There are a few bad apples. Most people do not end up on the welfare system. Some do. There's no statistics that suggest that immigrants are more prone to welfare than others. This is a stereotype, a very dangerous stereotype. I myself came as a refugee. I certainly fight that stereotype every day. It's one that is dangerous, that is unfair, and we should dispense with it.
Excuse me, but you remember, you are not a fundamentalist. You are not radical. It's the radicals I want to keep out, not the nice people like you, who've made a life for themselves, who've given a future to their children. There's a big difference here.
There are many Muslim families that come here that integrate well, and they are very successful Canadians. We have to keep out the ones who are undesirable, but we also have to have an open mind about letting people in regardless of what religion and culture they come from.
Okay, gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for being here today and sharing all this information. Mark Persaud from the Canadian International Peace Project, and Dave Sheskin, author of the book Waltzing with the Wicked, Embracing the Darkness. Gentlemen, thanks so much. We're going to take a short break, and we're going to be right back with Monica Parker. Okay, we're back here on Mensch Life. We have Monica Parker. After living and working in L.A. for 25 years, award-winning writer, actor, and producer Monica Parker has returned to Canada. And her first theatrical show in 20 years with her one-woman monologue, Sex Pies and a Few White Lies, certainly caught my attention. Monica has had roles in Nancy Drew, A Perfect Murder, ER, The X-Files, Murder, and Murder, She Wrote, Knots Landing, and she's also written a number of plays or shows or whatever. So welcome.
Thank you.
We're delighted to have you here. So tell us about this Sex Pies and a Few White Lies. That's certainly a catchy title.
Which was the point.
Right.
I've talked about writing a one-woman show for forever. And talk is cheap. And I sort of thought to myself, if I didn't get around to doing this, I would really be disappointed in me. And moving back to Canada had winter. Bad winters, so I actually stayed home and wrote. I just sat at my desk. I've been in LA for a very, very long time.
Right.
25 years.
Right.
Went like that. And
so you decided to write?
I decided, seeing as winter was so horrible and I was so not used to it and never wanted to. And
and have a couple of pies too. There was time for
there's
pies.
Always pies.
Okay.
Pies.
That's what winter does to us. Here,
not summer. I have no season discrimination whatsoever for when there should be pie. So I started writing it, and it had a lot of blessings on it. It came together very quickly, and people appeared, and a director, Pam Brighton, appeared, a woman who I'd worked with a long time ago, happened to be in town for a political theater workshop, which I didn't really want to go to, and did, and she said, I hear you have a play, and she's British, and I said, I do, and she said, I'd like to read it, and I gave it to her, and then she said, I'd like to direct it, and the next morning, and I said, done.
Now, was this new territory for you? I mean, the topic is quite personal.
It's very personal. It's very new territory. First of all, I've struggled with weight my whole life. I would suspect that it has. Well, I don't suspect. I know it has definitely colored, shaded my life. You are who you are, whatever that is, and whatever baggage you come into the world with or gather along the way shapes you, and certainly mine shaped me. And I've always had a sense of humor.
Yes.
And I don't know whether it was developed out of defense or whether it was developed out of survival, or it's just part of me. And I think it's a topic that is still one of the last bastions of discrimination, actually, fat. And I sort of have an interesting sort of feeling about family and how everybody comes from a dysfunctional family is my theory. So mine is just one more dysfunctional family.
So what's the play about?
The play it's really ultimately about self-worth is what it's about. But it's the road that you get there, that you have to take, the journey that you take till you understand what self-worth is. And it's about having had a family who were stout, not fat.
Is this actually your family?
Oh, my family. This is all about my family. And
so
they've all come to see the play.
You sort of probably carried this around with you that that you couldn't accept yourself.
It's interesting. I've had a different journey than some people. I have accepted myself. I always had accepted myself.
Right.
My determination was to make other people accept me on my terms, not on their terms.
Right.
And I think when I was younger, I did a lot of. I've done every diet known to mankind. You can name them. I've done them, and trying to be a people pleaser, trying to fit into other people's ideas of who I should be. It took me a long time to decide that's not who I am. I'm actually perfectly happy being me.
So what's the story about?
The story is really about it starts with the thousands of diets that it's taken to finally, and the 101 humiliations it's taken to become me. So it's a journey of being taunted and teased and self-loathing. It's definitely about that. And not being accepted by family, with them constantly wanting me to be somebody else. And my road
Did
to
they
find...
want you to be thin? Was that part of
Absolutely.
it? Even though they were stout. They didn't
Yeah,
leave
but
it
they
on.
weren't fat. They were Europeans, and they were old-fashioned. And my mother would feed me, and there'd be diet underneath every plate. There'd be a little article about what diet I should take next. I mean, there'd be a giant plate of schnitzel and God knows what. My mother was Austro-Hungarian, and there would
Is your
be...
mom still around?
No.
No, okay. We're going to take just a very short break, and we're going to come back and talk to Monica some more about this play. Hang in. Okay, we're back. So we were having schnitzel, and we were getting messages
I
under the
wish.
schnitzel. That sounds like a good idea. Where's the schnitzel? So we were getting messages under the nice schnitzel right out of the frying pan to go on a diet at the same time. So
The story that really starts with my mother, who was an Austro-Hungarian Jew, who had two... I have an older brother and sister, a lot older, 22 years older. And my mother was married before, and when the war... My mother was a big bridge player. And when the war... In the middle of the war, she had moved from Austria to Czechoslovakia. And when the war really escalated and they had to get out, an ambassador, she played bridge with big shots, movers and shakers. And one of them said he could get her get her a visa to Chile. And another said he could get her one to Scotland. Scotland was closer, so my mother said she wanted to go there. She thought she could take her children, and she couldn't. But she didn't know that. So she took them to her brother's, who was living in Brussels, for safekeeping. My brother at that time, I think, was 17, and my sister was 18. And she went to Scotland to set up a new home. In the meanwhile, my brother got taken by the Nazis to Auschwitz, and he was there for 3 years. He's a survivor. And my mother didn't know that because war had escalated, borders were closed, and nobody told her, and she didn't know. So she set up a home, and at the end of the war, when she found out that my brother and my sister were survivors and that she found out what had happened to them, she knew in order to bring, as I like to say, her real children back to Scotland, she knew she better find a husband. So she found one at a dance. My father. He wasn't dancing.
Was he Canadian?
He was in Scotland. He was a Brit, and he wasn't Jewish either. So she married him, and as she said to me, we did it once, and then she made a face, and she said, "Who knew you could get pregnant at my age from that man?" And he was gone before I was born.
okay.
And
So you've never seen? Have you ever?
yes,
met him since. Okay.
Totally. But he was the nice man who came to visit me on Sundays, until my sister got married to a doctor, and they moved to Toronto. And my mother, who had missed, obviously, her children, said, "We're moving." And my father, who had never lived with me, said, "I know my rights. You're not taking my daughter out of the country."
Right.
And my mother said, "Well, what rights? Rights?" He said, "I have rights." She said, "Well, we'll get back together. We'll start over." Her ruse, he fell for it. We came to Toronto. I was, by that time, 12, 13, and moved here with my mother and my father, who didn't care for each other, who lived together for the first time in my entire life for that sort of puberty year.
True
the
love.
year I gained all my weight in misery. And
You carried all the love around with you.
well, it wasn't easy living with two people who didn't like each other.
Yeah.
And then my father left, and life got normal again, and I lived with my mother. And my mother was a really strong, independent, single woman, a working woman ahead of her time. She was a couturier. She was very successful. And my father couldn't keep a job. And I basically lived my Jewish life. My sister married a Jewish doctor and kept a very Jewish life. And that's where all of my,
Judaism?
my cultural connection all comes from, because my mother, like a lot of survivors, I guess they go one way or the other. They either embrace it or they push it away. My mother pushed it away.
So tell us a bit about your acting career. I mean, you've had a very good career. You've been in, where were you? In Los
Angeles,
Los
in
Angeles?
Beverly Hills, to be precise.
Beverly Hills?
Where there are no fat people.
No fat people.
None
so
whatsoever.
They're not allowed.
No, I always say that all the women in Beverly Hills are only happy if they can get back their original weight. 6 pounds, nothing.
What was this? There's a story here about Ivan Reitman needed to
Yes.
borrow some clothing from you or something?
My
Did
mother
I-
was a couturier, had a
Right.
very lovely, fancy dress shop in an area called the Lothian Mews, which is was at Bloor and Bay. And I was a baby dress designer. I had always wanted to be a dress designer. Everybody in my family has something to do with schmutzes and designing clothes. And Ivan was a graduate, just graduating McMaster, and a model who worked for us, who was a girlfriend of mine, brought him into the store and said he needs dresses for his thesis movie. And I said to him, you can have them if I can have the lead. And he said, no, but you could be a hooker. I said, fine. That worked out. And then after
So
that,
you got your start.
I
as a
got my
hooker.
start. It was
Okay.
actually the funniest thing in the whole world. I mean, I sat on a lawn with all these people dressed as hookers and pimps, and they were really just really normal, nice people. And I thought, this is the circus I belong in. And then I had an exercise show on City TV, which I created, and Ivan was my director.
An exercise show.
Yeah, I
Okay.
wore a leotard and did exercises because I was young and completely not thinking, but I was also very flexible.
Did you have a weight problem back then, or?
As
call
I
it
like
that?
to say in my show, I was born at 6.5 pounds, and 1 hour later, I weighed 67 pounds. We have
Okay.
no idea what was in that milk. I've always had a weight problem.
Okay.
But I've always been very flexible. So I had this
Oh,
exercise show, and Gilda Radner used to come on it because she thought she was fat. I didn't think I was. But it was the first time in my life I got incredible validation for being me, and it was the message that sort of stuck with me that I'm supposed to be me. We're not
Good for
all
you.
intended to be Palominos.
Yeah. Well, I think you look great, Monica.
Why, thank you.
And we're happy to have you back here
Are you still
in
on a
Canada.
diet?
I'm never on a diet. No more. I don't do that anymore.
So how do you come to terms with food?
I eat it, and I enjoy it, and I don't worry about it. But I do exercise. I'm not an advocate that people should be heavy, but I think that some people, not everybody's thin, and I think we need to make peace with whatever we are while we're that, until we're something else.
So tell us what's coming up. I mean, we've had Sex Pies and a Few White Lies in February, which
Yes.
just passed. Are you planning on taking that on tour, or
I
what's,
mean,
what's
I'm looking for a venue now. That was the sort of the premiere,
Okay.
world premiere, as it were, and it was a show. It was a workshop and a showcase. And now we're talking to people in Ireland and
Oh,
in
wow.
Scotland,
Okay.
and in Spain. I want to do it. I think I created this so that I could travel and get paid.
Excellent.
Which is always a good plan. And then I want to do it in Canada, and I want to do it in New York and Los Angeles, and
Okay,
I want
well-
to do it everywhere.
Well, we have viewers all over the world on the
Fantastic.
internet, and we also have people watching on JLTV in the U.S. So if you're watching and you want to get to see this play, bring it to your city. Call Monica.
Totally.
Yeah. What, is there a website or?
It's because this is also very new.
Yes.
There is a website. It's not ready yet, but it will be called Sex Pies and a Few White
So how
Lies.
can people get in touch
How do
with you?
people? Is there an email address or something?
There's my agent they can get in touch
Kim
with.
Blackwell.
Will you announce it now?
Sure, his name is Perry Zimmel, and
Perry
he's at
Zimmel.
OAZ in Toronto.
OAZ in Toronto.
OAZ Entertainment.
Okay. Sex Pies and a Few White Lies. Monica Parker. Monica, thank you so much for
Thank
coming to
you.
see us.
Thank you
and
both.
sorry we missed it, so we'll have to get out maybe to Ireland or wherever your next show is.
It'll come to Canada.
It'll come back again?
I'm definitely going to do it here.
All right.
Doing it everywhere.
Sounds good. And we'll go out for pie sometime. Coffee,
I'll
whatever.
bake you a pie.
You'll bake me up. But next time, will you bring a pie next time?
I should make that be a policy that I will
That
bring
would be
pie
a great
wherever
idea.
I go.
That would be terrific. So thanks again for being with us. I'm going to tell you who we've got coming up next week. We have Rabbi Leo Davids and Rabbi Baruch Friedman Cole. They're going to be here to talk about Passover. That's our Passover show. So we look forward to seeing you.
See you next week. Shalom.
Shalom. Bye for now.
Shalom.